Well, I'm getting ready to go to work shortly. Um, I put off the start of my workday by an hour. I sent the people a message to let them know because I had to recharge my power bank. I've just finished that. Otherwise, everything in my refrigerator would have went bad during the day here because there was only 12% left in the power bank of a charge when after I cooked up my pizza for lunch. Anyway, yeah. But anyway, that's not what I want to talk about right now. That's just why I'm still sitting here at 11:30 instead of off on my job. I'll be going to my job in about 25 minutes or 20 minutes or so. I'll head out to my job. But what I want to talk about today is something that I've thought about and so on. And people often say, with the depopulation agenda, people will say they don't understand why um, the powers that be want to depopulate. The powers that be have said they want to. They've said they want to decrease the population of the Earth by as much as 95% by the year 2030. That's not going to happen except by a mass call. It's not going to happen by attrition, and it's not going to happen by handing out birth control devices in Africa and stuff like that. It just isn't going to happen that way. And so there's going to have to be a mass call. I believe that the COVID shots were a part of that mass call. I believe that the stuff they drop on us from the sky is part of it. I believe that they're doing stuff to our food and our water and our medicine and everything. And basically, I think the motivation for it, I think there's more than one motivation, but I think that a big part of it is um, there's been a lot of fraud. Like, for example, the pension plan here in Canada and in the United States and in most countries where they have an old age security plan of some sort, where when you get to your retirement age, you quit work and you get a stipend every month from the government to pay your bills and to buy your groceries and so on. They've looted that over the years. Because when that started, like here in Canada in the mid 60s, when we started with a real pension plan, I think it actually started in the 40s, but it started in a big way in the 60s, really. And the thing is, back then, a lot of people didn't see 65. 65 is retirement age here in Canada. A lot of people never saw 65 years of age. A lot of people died in their 50s or in their early 60s. A lot of people even died in their 40s and whatnot. And so there were a lot of people who didn't see their retirement, and the ones who didn't live for very long generally. You didn't get a whole lot of people living to be 95 years old and stuff, or even 85. If you lived to be 85, that was a real accomplishment. Most people who lived to see their retirement maybe had 5 years, you know, maybe 10 years at the outside. Some live to be 75 or whatever. But now we're getting people to retire and they live for 30 years. That's 30 years of the government having to cut a check for them that they never planned on having to cut for them. But due to advances in technology and so on, and the living being made easier in some ways, people started to live longer. Now, the other angle to it, though, too, is, and I remember I had a conversation with my mother in which we talked about this because she really doesn't believe any of this stuff that I think. She thinks that's all just hooey, conspiracy theory type stuff, and can't possibly be real. But we had a conversation one time, and I told her, I said, well, because she had said, well, what purpose would there be though to getting rid of everybody? Um, like who's going to do all the work if they get rid of the people? Man, now that's a good point on the surface of it for sure. But we got to bear in mind with technology, workers have become less and less necessary. The majority of the people, really, since the beginning of time, really, since the beginning of employment, have done menial jobs. The majority of the people have worked with a pick and a shovel, or whatever, that's the majority. And now technology has pretty much done away with those jobs. We have machinery now that does the same work in a lot less time with a lot fewer people. The same on manufacturing and whatnot. We have robots now doing the jobs the people used to do. Where you used to have a man holding a spray paint gun, painting the body of a car. Now we have a robot doing that, and so on, where you had a man, installing the various parts of the car. You had maybe a team of 4 men using a block and tackle to drop an engine into a car, and so on, and to get the transmission hooked up and all that. And there maybe would be 4 men that did that. Now they have a robot that does that, and they got 1 man watching a dozen or more robots on the assembly line, just making sure they don't screw up, calling in maintenance, shutting them down and calling in maintenance if they do, the maintenance department. And so, again, the worker bees aren't needed like they once were. I remember when I was a kid, and this is what I said to my mom. There was a set of railroad tracks at the end of the road there from where we lived, and every time we went into town, we had to cross the railroad tracks. And you'd see sometimes they'd be working on the tracks there, and you'd see 30 men with picks and shovels. This is back like in 1973, 1972, 73, 74, and so on. This is what you'd see. You'd see like 30 men out there, a work gang. And they'd be, swinging picks and digging with shovels. And, this is what they did. And it was all grunt work, And there, like I say, there'd be a crew there of like 30 men doing that. And maybe there'd be a guy there supervising, a boss, and that'd be it. That's what would be there. Now, when you see them working on the tracks, you see one guy riding a machine, and the machine's doing all the work that those other 30 men used to do with their picks and their shovels and other assorted hand tools. You got one machine now doing that. You got a guy sitting up on the machine, riding the machine, and you got another guy walking along beside the machine, watching what the machine's doing to make sure the machine doesn't screw up, And so you got one guy on the machine, another guy walking beside it, watching it. And that's it. That's your work crew. 2 men and a machine. Well, what do you do with those other, 27 people, 27, 28 men? What do you do with them? You had a crew of 30. Now you got a crew of 2 and a machine. What are those other 28 men supposed to do? What do we do with them? Not everybody can be a doctor or a lawyer or a chartered accountant or whatever, a professional of some sort, university professor or whatever. Not everybody can do those jobs. So what do you do with all those guys now that are surplus, basically? They're no longer needed to do that work. What do you do with all the elderly people that are living longer, and collecting their pension now for 30 years instead of collecting it for 10 years? Got to pay out 3 times as much, 3 times the money, basically, over the course of that person's lifetime. And what they did is they looted it. They took from the pension fund to fund other things, because they didn't have the foresight to realize that that money was going to be needed. So now we're hearing stories that the Canada pension is going to be bankrupt soon and all that. Who knows? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But those are stories that are that's stuff that's being talked about anyway. because it's been looted and it's been used for other things. So basically what you have is you have a ruling class that didn't anticipate the changes that came, even well the changes that were coming were being brought in largely by them. Again, how you can be setting the wheels in motion for something to happen and not realize that it's going to happen, I don't know. But there's that. And then on top of that, they were looting the treasury. Basically, they were dipping into the piggy bank all the time. And now they have all these people, all these surplus people, all these people now who don't have employment and so on, who don't have a purpose. Everybody needs a purpose. If you don't have a purpose in life, then it affects you. It affects who you are, And what did they do? What did they do back in the 90s? But they said, hey, just stay home and take dope. This is what they did. They doped everybody up. Well, not everybody, but they doped as many up as they could, And now we got this awful problem with fentanyl and other drugs, This was all started by the same authorities, and that was to basically keep us weak and docile and keep us obsessed with something other than what's going on, not to recognize what's actually happening, but to keep us obsessing. Because if you're a drug addict, like if you're on fentanyl or whatever, all your attention, all your energy, all your focus goes into getting your next high. That's all you care about. So rather than providing productive employment for people, and a purpose, and a good purpose, that they provided an escape. Hey, yeah, you just take this here, it'll be okay. Well, it isn't okay. That causes a bunch of problems, on top of everything else. So basically, now they're wanting to get rid of us because there's too many of us and they don't know what to do with us. And we're also having a great awakening. People are starting to realize how badly we've been getting screwed. And so people are getting angry and people are rebelling now. People are saying, no, I won't do that. Where years ago, if you put a guy in a lab coat on the television and he said, hey, you need to go and get this shot, for your own good and the good of society. Back in the 50s, if you said that, everybody would line up to get the shot. Now people are saying, well, wait a minute, what's in the shot? What are the potential side effects? Well, I know a guy who got that and he got really sick. I don't think I want that. And so on, So again, this is also what's happening, So they see themselves losing control. And of course, we outnumber them. So there is that too. So yeah, they're afraid of us, and that's why they want to get rid of us, basically, because the situation now is such where they actually have legitimate reason to be afraid of us. Because you got a bunch of people who have no purpose in life at this point, really, and who have no hope for a better future, and who are feeling helpless and feeling alone, and so on. They've also taken God out of the equation for the most part. They pretty much convinced people that God isn't real. So you can't look to God. There's no hope there if you don't believe in Him. So, and there's no there's no emphasis on being a morally upright person so you don't displease God. Not if you don't believe in God. So again, what's holding you back? If you don't have to worry about your future because you have none. You don't have to worry that you'll displease God because God is a myth, apparently. This is what people are believing now. I'm not saying that that's true, but that is what people are believing. And again, this is all due to what the powers that be have done, the way they've programmed people, and the changes that they've brought in, which were presented as an improvement to the quality of life, but have turned out to be anything but that, really, in the end. Anyway, bottom line is, the changes they brought in have not taken into account human nature. When you replace a gang of 30 men with a machine and 2 men, you've got 28 men now who suddenly have lost their purpose. And you don't have any other place for them to go. It's not like you can say, okay, well, you won't do that work anymore, but we do have something for you. We still have good, productive, honest work for you to do. No, it's like, look, no, you can't go to the factory because they're laying off right now because there's a machine has come in and, they're laying off all the guys who paint the cars and all the guys who drop the engines in and all the guys who put the steering columns in and stuff. All the guys who put the seats in the cars and stuff. They're laying all them off because they bought a bunch of robots to do that. And now it takes one man to watch a dozen robots. And so now, instead of having, a crew of, say, 20 men on that line, you've got one man and 4 robots or something, You got 1 man and 12 robots or whatever, that's what you've got now. So they're not hiring. Well, no, you can't become a ditch digger because we got a machine that does that now. We got one operator and he can dig a ditch in a day. He can dig a ditch in a single day. He can dig a 12-mile long ditch. With that machine, we don't need 30 men with picks and shovels anymore to do that. you know. So where are these people going to go? They're just going to join the mass of people who no longer have any productive employment, any hope for the future, and no longer see themselves as having a purpose. It's a dangerous thing, and the authorities are recognizing that. And so now they want to get rid of us. That's what's going on. That's the reason for all of this. When I mentioned to my mother about the men at the railroad tracks, she remembered that. She said, yes, I remember when that's how it was. And I said, well, it's not that way anymore. Where did those 30 men go? And what are they doing now? Now, I mean, the 30 men that I saw in 1973 working on the railroad tracks, they're all retired now or they've passed away. But what about the men who would have replaced them? Where did they go? As they retired, younger men used to come in. As the older men retired, younger men came in and took their place. Those jobs aren't there anymore to be taken, though. See, that this is what's happened. There's a lot of nefarious intent there, for sure. There's a lot of bad stuff happening. Now, some of it has just happened because of a lack of foresight and a lack of understanding of human nature. And that's also happened due to panic, because when the powers that be realize, oh shit, we screwed up, then they panic and they start bringing in solutions that also don't properly take into account human nature. People are not meant to sit around and worry about things. That's not what we're meant to do, to sit and think and ruminate and worry. We're not meant for that. God didn't design us for that. And so, here we are, though, in this situation, eh? Anyway, that's it in a nutshell. That's what's going on, as best as I can explain it anyway. And I probably do lack in my ability to explain it. I may have caused more confusion with this video than anything else. If I have, I apologize. But I'm just trying to explain it as best as I understand it anyway. All right, I got to go to work. We'll see you later.